Welcome and welcome back to the No Small Talk podcast. I'm your host, Simone, and today I'm joined by my friend, Katie.
Hello.
Katie and I met in church, and we got really close last year on our mission trip to Puerto Rico. I talked about that a little bit in the spiritual warfare episode, but we realized during this trip we had something in common, which led us to this conversation today. This episode is entitled I Don't Know How She Does It, which I'm borrowing from the 2011 film starring Sarah Jessica Parker as Kate Reddy. Kate is an employee at a Boston-based financial firm who struggles daily to embrace the demands of her high-powered career with the needs of her husband, played by Greg Keener, and their children. When she gets an account, acquires frequent trips to New York, and her husband gets a new job, Kate finds herself even thinner than she already was. And while I don't currently have a husband and children, I can relate to the main character who is driven and has a desire to show up as her best in various aspects of life. But as we've discussed in prior episodes, the idea of having it all without proper boundaries and support really isn't a reality, but an Americanized ideal. So in America, I feel like we wear busyness as a badge of honor. And admitting that we're dissatisfied with the college 9-to-5 corporate hamster wheel that we get kind of forced into at times, we feel like admitting that that's not for us or that we're maybe even exhausted by that is seen as a failure. And like many young adults who have full and active lives where they're pursuing what God has placed on their hearts, growing within a chosen profession, and trying to have good relationships with our loved ones, I've come to realize that overcrowding your plate can cause anyone to reach a point of burnout. Yeah. So we're both a little familiar with burnout.
Indeed.
But for our listeners, anyone who doesn't know, burnout is a state of mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion that can occur when someone is overwhelmed by prolonged stress, or some people will even call it chronic stress. So some signs of burnout include feeling tired or exhausted most of the time, having trouble sleeping or experiencing insomnia, having frequent headaches, experiencing muscle or joint pain, having gastrointestinal problems, like feeling sick or a loss of appetite, feeling frequently ill due to lowered immunity, having high blood pressure, having breathing issues, feeling discontented from your work and coworkers, having trouble focusing on your job, feeling little satisfaction from what you accomplish, doubting your skills and abilities, using substances like food, drugs, or alcohol to feel better. So, Katie, I know you to be an incredibly driven and talented person. And because of your work ethic and other aspects of your life, I know that at different points you have reached a dangerous point of burnout or chronic fatigue. So, do you mind sharing a little bit about your burnout experience, or if you identify with any of those signs or symptoms?
For sure. Okay, so actually, literally, I've experienced all of these.
Wow.
Every single one of these. So just to talk about what happened was I started working. It even started probably earliest is high school. My senior year of high school, I was in school. I had an internship and 2 part-time jobs. And yeah, it was so much. But I worked at a coffee chain. I started working there and I was like, oh, it's part-time. It's chill. It'll be fine. And then I started going to college and started going college full-time. I had 17 credit hours. And then I was supposed to only work 20 hours a week. I was like, I'll do part-time. It'll be great. It'll be fine. As I went on, I worked really, really hard there and the owners really, really liked me. So they would constantly be like, hey, do you think you could come in? And I didn't have the best home life at the time. So I was like, yeah, I'll come in, get that extra cash. I'm fine with that. And I started to a point where if I wasn't at school, I was at work. And then as that went around, because I graduated high school in 2019, that following year, COVID happened. And when COVID happened, I just went down this huge spiral of like school got canceled, everything got moved online. I really, really struggled with doing school online. So I started working all the time. And basically, I went from a low level and paying barista to a district manager within a year and a half. And I was 19 when I became a district manager and oversaw 5 stores.
Wow.
So
how many hours a week was that, Katie? From 20 to how many would you say?
It went, technically, it was supposed to be 40 to 60. It was not. It was 60 to 80. It averaged about 70, but most weeks I was pushing 80 hours a week.
Uh-huh.
And by the end of it, I was overseeing 7 different shops. I had 120 people that worked underneath this leadership. And also we had like store managers, but there was no formal structure because also like at this time it grew so much. So we were still figuring everything out. So it was a lot. It was on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very stressed out. Didn't know how to really deal with this. Also at this point in my life, I was not a follower of Christ. My whole life was work. Like that was my entire personality. And it was all I did, and that's what I pride myself on. But as I was going through, just to go back to like what I was feeling, hair loss, chronic, I didn't even say I had really bad acne, which I've never experienced acne before. Like I just didn't have that thing. Really bad
the hormonal imbalance causes. Yeah. Wow.
Okay. Hair loss. I had panic attacks really, really bad. Constantly. It felt like a weight was on my chest. And then I actually got to the point where sometimes I felt like I was having a heart attack or I felt sick and I went to the doctors and they literally tell me it was workers' fatigue. They're like, you just need to go home and sleep.
Oh, wow.
I was 19, 20 years old and I had to take baby aspirin in the morning because of
prevent heart attacks.
Because of how stressed out I was. And I even got to the point where like I had to, I was getting so anxious and so worked up that like my heart could not take it. Like my heart was actually breaking heartstrings in my chest because I was having such bad panic attacks.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was a lot. And but it was like everything. Like sometimes I would go through like, oh my gosh, every time I get really, really anxious, puke. And so then I didn't eat. And then also because of the way, like if anyone's worked in the food industry, they know you don't get breaks.
No.
Like you get breaks, quotation marks, but you actually don't. And so I would go 8-hour, 10-hour shifts without eating, except I worked at a coffee shop, so I'd have cold brew and stuff like that.
Which suppresses your appetite. So you don't think that you're hungry. And then later you're like, I didn't eat all day. Mm-hmm. And I'm starving and I'm malnourished and then I'm overly exhausted. Mm-hmm. So then that's adding to the health issues and the strain on your body. And you're not being able to replenish yourself with nutrients and rest because you're getting right back up to work that morning shift.
Yeah.
Girl.
On average, I probably slept 3 to 4 hours a night. For 4 years.
So we know externally what led to your burnout or your chronic fatigue was having this very demanding job, maybe not wanting to be like at your home situation because it wasn't the best. What internal aspects do you think led you to maybe being in this environment where honestly you lacked professional boundaries, likely? I'm assuming. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I hear coming out of it. So what kind of led you to that space where like that felt rewarding to you to like be in this environment?
My big thing was being a chronic people pleaser. Like I really just having like grown up and I constantly had a lot of issues growing up. Like I developed late with my reading and writing because I have a learning disability. I was struggling like for the first, like I couldn't read until I was 12. So when I first got into school and everything, I was really behind. Yeah. So then I felt like I was always having to make stuff up. Like I had to prove myself. So then at that point, I always became an overachiever where I'm like, look, I'm not stupid, or look, I'm dumb. Like I can do this. Like I'm just as good as everyone else kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when I started working at this coffee place, the owners there, they are really, really amazing people. But they gave me like the satisfaction that I'd never had before. Like someone was like, "You're doing a good job and we appreciate you." And I was like, I crave that gratification.
Yeah.
The constant like attaboy kind of thing. And it just made me feel like I was actually worth something. Like I was important here. Like they would say things like, "Oh, you just make the store so much better." And customers every day coming in being like, "Oh, my coffee just tastes so much better when you make it," which they're gaslighting, but like the same thing. Like it was good for my
Wow, you know what you talk about with the beans. I gotta be real.
like, so I'm like telling people being like, "Oh, I'm this important." Like, "Oh, I got this promoted." Also, during my career there, I was the fastest promoted person they ever had.
Wow.
I think, I don't know if this is true, still am, but they never promoted someone as fast as me. I on average got promoted and got like a pay raise and then a different position every 3 months.
Whoa.
On average. But that's not even like, I was only a store manager for I think not even 6 months before I became district. And the
Wow.
same thing, like I was a barista for about I think a month, and then I was the next position for like, this was right after I got hired and trained. Once I was out of training, I was regular barista for like a month, and then I was promoted to the next position. Then I was promoted to a supervisor, I think like a month and a half later. And then I became an assistant manager, and I think I stayed in the assistant manager position for the longest. I think I was like, because that's when COVID and everything was happening.
Yeah.
And the certain location I had was actually the technical store manager was the owner. So they hadn't had an actual store manager in years. And it's something that they usually didn't do because it was a really well-performing store. And this is when they had less stores. So they really focused on they could be there every day and stuff. But as the stores grew, they couldn't be there every day. So I took in that position. But it was a different level for them. Yeah. And then right after that, I got promoted to district manager. And I started working for them in March of 2019, and I was district manager by, I think it was January 2021. I officially became a district manager.
Wow.
Yeah.
So less than 2 years.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, like what the crap for
Yeah.
your health. But I understand the appeal though, because you're like, wow, like I feel important.
Mhm.
I feel valued. I know I'm making a difference and like a really tangible impact on
Mhm.
this profession, on this business. The owners really loved you.
Mhm.
There's a lot of social capital, I think, kind of like
Yeah.
fueling this desire to work, like how you were working. But yeah, but then those internal aspects of like really being a people pleaser and like, were you afraid to say like no? Like, were
Yes.
they like
I was terrified of saying no to them. Well, like, because it was just that internal thing of being a people pleaser. Like, I
Yeah.
didn't want to be like, no. So I had no boundaries at first. And it even got to the point where, like, I turned in my availability for that first school semester and they misread it. They didn't realize what they were doing when they scheduled me. And I didn't say anything for months until I actually, so basically, like, my class started at 10:30 in the morning and they didn't realize that. They thought it started later in the afternoon. So they were scheduling me an open shift till 9 o'clock. Well, this is my freshman year of college. And this is my first time in college. So I worked an open, which you had to be at the store at like 5:30 in the morning. And then I worked till 9 a.m. Then I go to Wayne State. So I'd drive down to downtown Detroit from where I was working, which was about 30 minutes away, park, go and run to my class, and then go to class until about, I want to say probably like 5, 6 p.m. at night. And then I would go work at my other job, which was a nighttime job for like a while, because that my second job was a seasonal job. So I didn't have it full through, but I had it for the first couple months of my semester. But they didn't realize that I was doing that because I was too afraid to be like, well, no one else can open or something like that, until I had like a huge project and I stayed up the entire night, because they actually would also schedule me to close on the same time. So I would be doing an open to 9, then go to school all day. And the next day I would open and then go to school all day. And then the next day I'd have school early in the morning and then close. So I do the clopens. So you would close the one day and then you'd open the next. and while doing school, and I stayed up one whole night and I was drinking Red Bull trying to get a presentation done, and I went in the next day. I had to open. Then I went to school to do my presentation. And at that point, I hadn't eaten. I hadn't slept. I spent the entire night drinking Red Bull. Then I had coffee in the morning for breakfast, drove down to Wayne State, gave my presentation, puked in front of the entire class while I was giving the presentation, and ran out of the building crying because why I puked was the professor was like, I can tell you rushed this, and I can tell that you did this last night. Puked right in front of the class.
Oh my God.
And then I told like the assistant manager at the time like what happened, and then they told the owners that like I was burnt out. Like at that point they were just like, she's over, like you have to change your schedule. Like she can't work this day. And
did you still try to make an excuse like, no, I can do it? Like,
no, I was like, it's fine. But then the next day, since they couldn't change the schedule, they only scheduled me 2 days the next week. So I was like, they hate me. She's like, I was like, the owners hate me. They're mad at me because they cut my hours right then. And then
good that they cut your hours, but you were probably like, because you were reading it because your work was tied to like your productivity and like, do they not like you anymore? Gosh, I have been there.
What they did for punishments is they cut people's hours.
Yeah, that's what most companies do. Like, I mean, like, especially in that industry of like food service and hospitality, it's like, oh, I made someone angry, so now they're cutting my hours because they like, I'm not going to get paid enough. Oh my gosh.
And this is also like keeping in mind, this is the first time I'm in the workforce as an adult. So this is the first time like I'm making all this money and like that kind of aspect. So in this, I don't know what's to be expected. So I'm thinking this is normal. Like this work environment is normal. Which unfortunately it is the case for a lot of people. And
they don't realize it's toxic.
Like, they don't realize it's not okay.
Yeah.
That
makes so much sense. So like, was that your moment of realizing you were burnt out, or like did that come later? When did your moment come where you were like, wow, I am burnt out?
So about 4 years later.
Isn't that right? Girl, oh my gosh, that's so real. That is so real.
It got worse.
Girl, okay, continue. My bad. Like you making me like I feel triggered.
Sorry. No, because I pride myself about how much abuse I can go through. I'm like, it's fine. It's not. And this is the thing. The entire time I'm at this place, there are people, because the rollover there, which I know we're going to talk about later, about
turnover was high, right?
The turnover in that business is 50%.
Dang.
That's not a fake statistic either. Especially this, like, because it's actually okay. The common thing is because most of the time these businesses, they're hiring high schoolers and college students. This job is supposed to prepare people to go into the corporate workforce. That's always what they say. It's expected to have turnover. Like no one's going to stay at that career the entire time. The goal is to retain people for 2 years. Like that is their goal. They want to usually keep people through college because those are the people who will do this job because it's not the highest paying job.
But it's flexible and it gives them some experience and it gives them extra money while they're going through school.
No, exactly. Okay. So that's the thing. But the thing that's so draining about it is that it's constantly new people. So you're constantly training people because the turnover is so crazy. So there was a district manager before me. He didn't get burnt out though. He left. Then while I became a district manager, they brought on a second district manager. And this district manager, I still think about this person like all the time because while we're doing everything, he was brought on to help run 2 different locations. And he had a lot of things going on in his personal life, but he would pass been an owner. He was a lot older than me. Like this is like, keep in mind at this time I'm 20, 21. He's grown adult. He had already owned a business, like kind of thing. And when he was there for, I want to say like a couple months. It wasn't very long, but we were in the same position and he had way less workload than I did. And I still remember the day we were working in one location together and it was just me and him. And he looked at me and he's like, girl, you're just so young. You're going to get burnt out and you're going to get tired. Like, it doesn't seem like you're going to get tired. And I know you've been doing this a lot longer than other people, but you're going to get tired. And I was like, and he's like, I think you need to start talking. Like he was talking about me going to therapy because he's like, you need to unpack these issues you have.
God bless him. I'm sorry. God bless him. Was that your wake-up call?
Well, that was when I started. I went for another like 2 years after this, but like that was the first point where I think about then where I started being like, oh, this isn't, because he came from such a genuine place. Like I knew, because there was a bunch of people who everyone would say it, like, Katie, oh, you work so hard. Aren't you tired? Like, how do you do it? I don't know how you do it. I'd hear it all the time.
I don't know how she does it.
Nope, exactly. I hear it all the time. Like, when do you have time to sleep? And I kind of prided myself off of it a bit. Like, people would be like, oh, I only slept this hour and I'm doing this and this and this. And everyone will always say, like, I never compared myself to being like, oh, I'm way busier than you, because I always thought that was rude. And I always had a lot of people that would do it. Like, growing up, I had that environment where, like, if you're not working the most hours in the house, then are you actually working?
Yeah, I grew up with that too. Like, are you working today? Like, what are you doing? Like, just kind of like, and then feeling like I have to have an explanation if I'm not busy.
No,
like,
exactly. That's the type
of thing. Unhealthy, and they don't get it because it's that generation.
That is,
and they see it as like it is a badge of honor for them. So like, oh, I worked 7 days this week. What did you do? Like, like I worked a 10-hour day. What did you do? Like,
like I'm working 50 hours this week. So like that type of thing. Like, it was that kind of thing. Like, oh, I worked 50 hours this week. I worked 40. But the big point when I feel like I didn't even really reach it, because I always was like, oh, it's not work to me because I love my job, because it was my entire life. I was like, all I do is I go to work all day. At this point, I'm sometimes going to school, sometimes not. And then it started not, like, at the point where I started getting tired was when I was consistently working these 80, 90-hour weeks. And we had, at this point, there was some new management brought in that I did not get along with. And I was putting extra loads of work on. And then the big thing for me where I started realizing it was unhealthy was I actually had a friend pass away outside of work. So most of the time, most of my friends were in work. This person was a childhood friend, and I had never lost someone like the same age as me, and I really didn't know how to process it. And I had to come into work the day after. It was the morning I think I found out, and I was like a mess. I still remember, because my one really good friend, I came into the one store to like restock their area, and I had to wear sunglasses because I was crying so hard. And I was like really, really tired. And then I started going to church because I didn't know how to process my grief. And at this point, I'm a district manager, and there's no one else that's the same job title. And all my friends are either other store managers, or they're supervisor, or they're just baristas. And the owners had put a level of, I had to put boundaries up of professionalism with the employees, just because most of them I was younger than or the same age as.
Yeah.
And they had talked to me about having those boundaries where they're like, can't really like lean on them like that, like you would with a friend outside. And I was like, okay, so
you felt isolated, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was super isolated. I felt like I had no close friends. And at this point too, my bosses had brought, literally the day before was Easter when I found out, and they had brought me to church with them for the first time. And that was the first time I went to church since I was 14.
Wow.
Because my family was gone doing something, and they took me to church with them. And then literally that next morning is when I found out my friend passed away. And that Thursday, I went to their young adults for the first time. And when I went to the young adults for the first time, I found community. And I met really good people. And then I started having this life outside of work. And then at that certain point, I was like, wait, as soon as I started having friends and I started having a relationship outside of work at that point, it did not become my life. And it really at that point started showing more that I was tired all the time. Because at first, when I even now, I met my husband at the young adults group. When we first started dating, we love him. He can testify that I was like, I love my job and my job is everything and I work so much, but it's okay because I love it and it's great and I don't care that I work this much. And he even was like, it's a lot. I'm like, oh, I love it. It's okay. Like, it's great. And I was like, it's fine. And then I had these relationships outside of it. And then I was like, wait, my whole life isn't about making coffee. Wait a minute, what? And then I also was going through this crisis at the time of like dealing with, I'm 21 years old, and what happens if I just die now? I'm like, what am I going to leave behind? Like, I built someone else's business or like helped with someone else's business. That's what happened to me. Like, if I die right now. And I was going through that journey. And then at this time too, I started looking into more, like looking to God. And then the first big thing that really, really hit me, where at that point I started transitioning out, I still remember Pastor Jamie preached on idols in church. And at that point, I realized I idolized myself in that position where my work was my entire identity. And that was the first point in my mind. Like when he started saying that, like he was talking about it in church, never have I once crossed my mind where it was like, quit your job. But we were in service and I was like, I need to quit my job. And I was like, wait a minute, what? No, I'm not going to quit my job. Like I'm making all this money. Like I love my job. And I kept having to tell myself, I never had to do that before, where I was like, I love my job. And then it started coming more realization. Then it started getting worse where like the stress acne got worse. My hair started falling out more. I got really uncomfortable in a place that I wasn't uncomfortable before.
Oh, preach. I'm sorry, but like literally not the same situation, but very similar, because I firmly believe like God gives you the grace sometimes to be in certain situations and places for a period of time. And when he tells you to go, you go. And if you don't go and you're disobedient, things will start happening.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I first like, I was not a district manager, but you know, and like you, I think my whole life I could have identified as a people pleaser. I could have identified as feeling not enough or like inadequate compared to like the people around me or even compared to my parents. Because I do respect them. I find them very like accomplished, and I've always been like, oh, I want to be like that, or I compare myself like to my dad or my mom or whatever. And having a lot of my self-worth and identity tied to my level of productivity and accomplishment. That was a constant struggle for me. So I even remember like graduating college and being like, oh, I'm not a student anymore. Who am I? What is my, because I was living at a house with people and they were like, oh, you're not a student anymore. You're not a student anymore. Like, and then they're like saying like a great thing. And I'm like, but what does that mean? Like, who am I? My good friend Sydney was like, I remember talking to her on the phone one day and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I was depressed. Like that whole summer after I graduated college, I didn't realize what it was, but it was a huge depressive episode that I fell into because I had like a complete identity crisis. And I was like, who even am I without like school? And she's like, well, can you just take a moment to appreciate what you accomplished? Can't you just breathe and be like, oh, I did this thing that I've been working towards since my whole life?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what's wrong with me that I can't? And then like, and that kind of snowballed into, because I got the job that I had at the time. Like I had an internship my senior year that was very coveted. Like a lot of people wanted it. I don't know how I really got it, except God. Like it was definitely an answer to a prayer.
Yeah.
And then they hired me on as a contractor. And then a year later I got hired in. And then even as a contractor, like 6 months in, like I know I had never done that type of job before, but I was already training people. Like I was very, in a sense, like that. Like I felt like I had a lot of prestige. Like people like regarded me as a subject mastermind, essentially. Like, oh, she's the specialist in this, she's a specialist in this, like on multiple different things. So people would ask me questions all the time, and I felt like very valued. And they were like, we love that you're here, and you're like the light of our team, and you help morale, and like all these different accolades that I was like, okay, great. But unlike you, I was not getting promoted a lot, but like, and that kind of made me feel inadequate, and I was getting frustrated and I felt stuck. So my response to feeling that way was like, well, let me add more onto my plate outside of the role within the company so I can show that I'm invested, that I'm present, that I am a value add. So I joined the boards of employee resource groups, and I was creating programming, and people were so excited, and it was just a lot of stuff. Like I just kept adding things on to prove my worth. And then I got like my license outside of work. So I like was doing that on the side, like trying to do real estate on the side of like a full-time corporate job, which at that point we were remote. So when you work remote or virtually, you know that a typical 8-hour day, you're like, well, I don't have to get dressed and drive anywhere. So that's an extra hour I can work. And then I don't have to come home and leave. So that's an extra hour. So literally there was a point where I was like, I was living back. I like moved home. And I'm working, and my mom was like, so before I leave every day, you're online. And then when I come home, you're online way after I get home. What's the deal? Just like, what? Oh, and you're crying every other day. What's the deal? So like, I really thought like, you know, it would make me feel better to add the extra community stuff, like the work stuff and the extra, like the side hustle to get more income. But like 1 month, things just completely broke. It was like everything was fine. Like I had like a high productivity month. I was getting a raise. I felt really great. But then it's like suddenly everything just came crashing down like inside. And I remember, I think it was June of 2021. Like I just felt like I was on fire. Like everything around me was burning. And I went into like, I was like, well, I don't really know what's going on. And I like maybe the fall prior to that, I gotten a lot closer to God. And I was like, well, let me try. Like, and I had done like my first Daniel fast, like November of 2020. So now we're in July. So I'm like, well, let me try to like fast and let me pray and let me like see God. And I used to think people were dramatic when they're like, I heard the voice of God. But if I kid you, like I was sitting in prayer in my bedroom and I was like, what do I do? And I heard, just quit your job. Like, just quit. And I was like, what? And I was like, who said that? I was like, not me. I was like, why would I quit this job? Like, it's my security and I get an income and I'm saving so much money. And why would I do that? Like, I'm this close to a promotion and like all this stuff, trying to talk myself out of it. But I was like, well, if that was really you, God, like, you're going to confirm it. So confirm it then, please. And I kid you not, the 10 following days after that, I was getting random phone calls from coworkers, friends, people telling me, you had such a fire when I met you, and your fire's getting snuffed out if you stay here. And like, I'm like, where is this coming from? Like, it was crazy. Like getting phone calls, text messages. Like I was like, okay, God, I hear you now. Like, fine. And then I finally, you know, I submitted my resignation letter, and my boss was like, I'm so proud of you. And I was like, what?
My bosses, when I put in my 2 weeks, I thought they were going to be so mad at me because at this point, not only were we really close on a work level, we were really close on a professional level.
Yeah.
Or no, we were close on a professional level and a personal level.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay.
You're afraid. You're like, am I going to lose these people in my life? Plus, like, yeah.
And literally at this point too, because they had been helping me with my journey with Christ and God and growing. And I had told them on a personal level where I was like, I feel like God is telling me I just need to go. And they were very much like, it's okay. They're like, you're growing, you're changing. We know God has other plans for you. And they're like, we shepherd you here and it's okay. Because it was like, not to say like I was this biggest deal ever. It was a really big deal for me leaving because I had so much responsibility.
Yeah.
And it was a very fast transition. And it was this weird kind of reassuring thing too, because as I was telling people I was leaving, it was some of my coworkers were like, no, please don't go kind of thing. But all of the customers and other things were like, I'm so sad you're leaving, but I'm so happy for you.
Yeah.
And it was like,
wow.
They were constantly being like, well, you can work anywhere because you have this amazing work ethic. And then they were like, you should just open your own coffee store because you're there. The people would constantly used to make jokes when I was working there. Like, do you have a cot in the back? Or like, because I was always at work and that was my entire thing. And everyone was just like, good for you. And they're like, you're going to love having your break. Like, they're like, just take a break. Don't worry about getting right back into work. They're like,
My boss said the same thing. He was like,
Mhm.
I hope you take this time to rest and heal.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? And I was
Yeah.
like, okay. He's like, yeah, you deserve a rest. And my mom said the same thing. Because my dad was like, well, get on like disability or like do a leave of
Yeah.
absence. And I was like, I understand the money wise. He's like, get a leave of absence. But my mom was like, well, read your contract. And I was like, and I read it. I think for me to take a leave of absence, like I'd have to come back and work a specific amount of
Yeah.
time. And like the idea of having to come back and work, like I was like, what would be the point of a break? I'd be stressed out. So
Mhm.
she's like, you just gotta quit. And I was like, I
Yeah.
have to listen to the voice. I was like, whatever. But no, I think I'm really, really glad that like even though I didn't fully rest, which we'll get into
Mhm.
later, but I took at least a month or so like not doing anything, quote unquote. And
Mhm.
that was the first time I've ever done that in my life. Like I had
Okay.
to reflect because I felt guilty. Like I felt
Mhm.
like lazy. And I was like, this is horrible. Like why? Like I was like beating myself up inside for resting. And
Yes.
that's when I realized like I had a problem because
Mhm.
my mom had to remind me, she's like, so you did toddler tech at 2, then you did Head Start, then you were in pre-K, then you were in kindergarten, then you would have, and she's like, and you've been an honor roll student your whole time in school, and then you
Mhm.
were on Dean's List, and then she's like, when have you ever had a break? She's like, you remember your senior year, you had 4 jobs, and you were in school doing 13 credits. And I was like, oh yeah, that. She's like, when have you ever taken a break? And I'm
Right.
like, I don't know. My worth is tied to my work ethic. I'm like,
Well, preach. No, because that is the exact thing. Because when I quit my job, I will say, which we'll probably get into it, that was probably one of the lower points of my life mentally. And it was kind of this weird thing because at this point, I thought like, God, he did tell me to quit, but I went through my woods because my entire worth again was based off my job and based off that. And at that point, I had never stopped in my life. Ever since I joined the workforce, ever since I never had a break with
yeah.
school and just everything. There was always a million things happening.
Because even like summer breaks, because I've always been in like honors or AP, so it's like you had summer work, like you
Yeah,
had a
I was always an AP
if
too in
you
high
use the
school.
summer.
Mhm.
Yeah, like you don't get a break if you've done
Yeah.
like I man. So I would say sadly, Katie and I are not alone in having these experiences of chronic fatigue. There are some statistics that I would like to share in regards to burnout. So, prevalence wise, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, 52% of employees reported being burned out in the past year. And this is 2024. Job functions. Project managers have the highest burnout rate in the US at 50%, followed by healthcare workers at 49%. Age and gender. Burnout is more common among women, young workers, and mid level employees. So you covered all of these. You are a woman, young worker, and a mid level management
Mhm.
employee. Employees who feel comfortable discussing their mental health at work may experience lower burnout, but clearly that was not either of us. Like I remember using like EAP and like I used it all for like my relationship breakdown, but I didn't even want to talk about the fact that I was burned out at work because like that was the thing like getting me through. Like I was like, well, if I'm not this, then I'm at least like a really good employee. And people were like, we couldn't even tell. Like, we're going through this. And like, I feel like God gave me grace too, in a sense. Like,
Mhm.
I think I didn't show what I was going through because like he's just that good. That like he did, like I didn't look like
Mhm.
what I was going through. But I also feel like on the flip side of that, it was like just covering up like what I needed to really deal with. And okay, so employees who are burnt out are less likely to go above and beyond than what is expected of them. I remember reaching this point where
Mhm.
like I could barely send an email. And I was like, what's going on with me? Like I mentally like couldn't function in that way. Burned out employees are nearly 3 times more likely to actively be searching for another job. The annual healthcare spend on workplace burnout is between 125 billion and 190 billion. Virtual work. So 38% of employees who work virtually say that burnout was worsened over the pandemic compared to 28% of those who work on site. I would say that's true based on the example I gave of like I know my burnout got really like I was already kind of like over my job before
Mhm.
March of 2020 and then I went remote like April of 2020 And yeah, like I was remote since then. Like, so if I started the job February of 2017,
Yeah.
internship, whatever, and then like we went remote March of 2020, I know like April of 2020 was my highest productivity month wise with my job and my goals. I got like basically like an award, a shout out from like our director, like all these different things I did really well that month. But then I kind of kept up that level, like that was then my like baseline
standard. Yeah.
Yeah, so then I kept wanting to like, oh, I got to be better. I got to keep doing it. I got to keep showing up as like I'm a top tier person and I've been here maybe the least amount of time, but I'm already like it was just everything rolling into each other, which really contributed to my burnout. So we've talked now a lot about burnout, like how it happens, I think, which I think can really be tied to external circumstances and then those internal circumstances of feeling inadequate, comparing yourself, being a people pleaser to an extent, getting that worth from your work. And I would say some tips on overcoming burnout, I think is what helped you and probably myself too, is being honest with God and yourself. Like having that come to Jesus moment where you're praying and where you're like, okay, something's really wrong. What do I do? What do you want me to do? And listening, which sometimes takes a minute. Because I remember when I told people I was quitting and they were like, they should have done that 2 years ago. And I'm like, well, I'm doing it now. I'm like, it's almost 5 years there, but I'm doing it now. Okay.
I heard that phrase so much. How'd you make it this long? I'm like, I don't know.
I don't know how I did it, but we did. Okay.
I wasn't listening. I'm sorry.
I think another part of it too, like overcoming, is doing what you did too, which was connecting with friends and family. So you found that community. You found like our young adults group. You found people who kind of gave you meaning and purpose, like outside of your career. And that ultimately being, going deeper in your faith and finding your identity in Christ over your career. And also, I think learning how to rest, because like I definitely struggled with the concept of rest.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh. Like I remember like in the midst of this, like once I quit my job, I finally overcame that hurdle. And then it was like that month or two off I was going to take. That was just a struggle. Like every day I woke up feeling like meaningless. Like I was like, I'm worthless. Like I'm not doing anything. Like I felt, but I was so exhausted. Just mentally, physically, emotionally, just tired. Like it was like when I finally got to stop, I was like, what did I just put my body through? And the body keeps the score. So it was just rough. And I remember having like a breakdown. Like I had a whole breakdown, like crying on my bathroom floor. Like I'm calling a friend and I'm like, what the crap is going on? And we talked and she kind of like talked me off the ledge a little bit. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I was like crying. And I like went to Marshall's because Marshall's is my happy place.
Yes.
Right? And I went to get, and I heard God say, be still. And I was like, what does that mean? I don't know what stillness is.
Like, wait a minute.
Like, what is that? And I go to Marshall's and I get a candle and like the first journal, because I go to the journal because like that's kind of my therapy. Like, I had a therapist, but I was like, journaling is my thing. And the first journal, I turned on the aisle and it was like in rose gold, big print, be still. And I was like, okay.
That's good. That's good.
And I was like, oh, so that's what's next. So I do want to get into, like, since we talk about burnout, we talk about what's led to it. It's like, how do we heal from and then prevent burnout? Yeah. And I have like, in my mind, there's 3 points. And we kind of already talked about the first a lot, but I think we need to go into deeper of like what it means. But the first thing I would say would be stop making an idol out of your career. As far as like allowing it to define you and give you value, when your value should be found in Christ. And in a lot of young adult spaces, especially even the space that we were in, which was really great, but I feel like there's this constant underlying conversation about like finding your purpose. It puts a lot of pressure on people to fill their identity void with a career or some like life mission, almost like insinuating that you're not there yet. Like you haven't arrived yet because you don't know, if you don't know what it is, or you're not in that particular career, you're still in school, or you don't know what your purpose is. You feel like you can't fully please God because you're not walking in your purpose yet.
Mhm.
And honestly, like, that's such a lie from the enemy. Like, I feel like it's crazy to think that out of like an infinite God that created us, that our
Right.
purpose is something like a job.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds like duh, but it's like that's really what we think sometimes. Like, oh, my whole reason I was created was to do this particular job.
Mhm.
Like,
No,
how
exactly.
ridiculous is that?
This reminds me so much of, do you remember when we were talking about in Puerto Rico when I brought up the fact that, who are we talking about it? But one of the questions that bugs me the most is like a lot of times you can tell people are stuck in their career because the first time they'll
What
ask,
do you
"What
do?
do you do?"
Oh, I hate
What
that.
do you
Like,
Yeah,
because we talked about this,
I
and
think
I was
about that
telling
conversation
you,
all the time.
yeah, like we talked about it because I was telling you guys, I was like, and because also one of the things I loved about all of you is like none of us asked each other that at all. Like at
Mhm,
first, like we never really talked about it. And I think one time I told you because there was someone there who was like very clearly defined by what they did. Like she would always talk about with me. It was like, oh, what do you do? What are you doing?
mhm.
Like, what's this about? Like, ask me about my job and my career. And I was like, I had made a concerted effort, especially since quitting, to like not ask people what you do. Because I think that's so like it's demoralizing, honestly. Like, oh, what do you do? Like
I
people are like summing you up, making preconceived notions about you because of what your career is. Like,
Mhm.
and even at that time, like I've never really been unemployed. Like even when I was like not working, I still had like my real estate license. I was still
Mhm.
doing deals or whatever. Like well, I made it such an effort to like not even talk about it with people, which was probably bad for business wise, but like for me emotionally and personally, I was like, I can't say it unless it like
Yeah.
comes up naturally. Like I don't want to be defined by it right now.
No, exactly. I felt the same exact way and even got to I don't ask people that question anymore. I let it come out naturally. There are some friends I have right now, I have no idea what they do for work because I don't ask that. Like,
We don't
I
talk
was
about it. We have so many other
yeah,
things to talk about.
just with like the whole even just I that was my entire personality, that was my entire life was work. So I'm like, I just don't want to define anyone else by that because I totally understand what it's like to be defined by that. I don't ask that question anymore. And I really hate when that question gets asked because even now, in my position now, I love my job now, but it's one of those jobs where I still have that kind of like, it's not the most important thing in the world. Like, I don't have the highest role in the world. I'm an admin at a church. So a lot of times people are like, oh, you're an assistant. Or like sometimes you get treated as like, almost a little bit like kind of like a secretary, even though that's not my job.
Yeah.
Like, it is an important job, but also it's not like I'm not a district manager anymore. So it's not that same like pizzazz
Prestige.
to it.
There's
Yeah,
no
the
prestige
prestige.
to it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm an admin. Like,
Yeah.
oh,
You're like, what do you do? And they're like, what is that? And I'm like, oh, yeah. And they're like, do you just get coffee, everyone? I'm like, no, that's not it. But it's one of those like weird thing. I just don't let it define me anymore. I really try not to define other people by it anymore. I never ask that question. Like, what do you do?
I feel like when we met, you had, was it before or it was like before you got this job? And then I remember like, or it was right when you got it.
It was right when I got it.
Yeah.
When we went to Puerto Rico, it was the second week of my job starting.
Yes.
Because I had gotten the job so I had quit the coffee shop and I was unemployed for like 3 months. And then I got an at-home job where I worked remotely and hated it. It was another full-time job. I had the same exact thing, no work-life balance because my computer was at home and they are constantly asking me like, "Can you hop online? Can you do this? Can you do that?" And it was a really toxic work environment a bit where like they had no boundaries and they did not have the proper training either. So,
Mm-hmm.
and the turnover rate there was insane. They were constantly losing people.
Ugh.
So, like when we did our training, they were like, only one of you or two of you will make it through the next 3 months. And there was like 10 of us in the room. And it was one of those things where I got assigned to my one team. They're like, oh, you got assigned to that team? They don't really last that long. And it was just because I feel like if that job was in person, it would have been so much better. But it being at home and being that disconnect, and also the person who was like supposed to give assistance was really mean, made the job really, really bad.
Ugh.
But the reason why that job was important is actually I used what I learned there a lot in my admin job now. So now it makes sense. But I was like, how did I go from this overworking environment to now this environment where I don't like it either. I'm like, God, where am I supposed to be? I'm like, what is going on?
But it's all on purpose, because I literally will reflect on like every single job I've had, and I'm like, wow, like all of this has led me to where I currently am, and then where I currently am may lead me to something else. But like, he has this master plan that we only get to see little glimpses of. Like,
you gotta trust. No, because that's literally what happened. Because I went from this one job and then I worked remotely, where I learned a lot of the stuff that I do now for my admin job there. And because I did admin stuff when I worked at the coffee shop, but not to the same level.
Yeah.
And then literally when I was leaving the remote job, I was just looking for things online. Like, well, I was still working there because I was like, I can't do this anymore. I have to do something else. And I found a part-time job at the coffee shop inside the church that I currently work at. Huge pay cut. I guess I'll just take it because I know how to make coffee. And I really wanted to go back to school at that time. Quit that job, immediately started working at the coffee shop. Was at the coffee shop for about like literally like a month or two. And then the admin position became open in the church. And how I got it, which I didn't even technically qualify for, was one of the pastors came down to the coffee and he was like, tell me your life story, Katie. And I was like, I actually was looking for like an admin job because I didn't like my last job, but I found the coffee job. So that's how. And he's like, oh, you want an admin job? And I was like, yeah. Man walks away. And I was like, okay. I guess that's weird. And then two other like members of the church staff come down that are on leadership, and they're like, you want an admin job? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, well, our admin's leaving. Maybe if you want to apply, do that. And then literally started working there as the admin. And now I'm back in school because of it.
It's so hard to get admin jobs at churches too. I just have to I'm just like that. It's so a God thing that happens.
Because it's the best. I'm sorry. Like, I love my job now. And that's the reason why it's such a healthy work environment. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I'm finally, which my original goal was to be at the coffee shop part-time so I could go back to school. They give me the space to go to school. Like, they're super supportive. Like, my work schedule changes by semester now. And they just let me do it.
That's awesome.
So as long as I get my hours in, they're like, it's okay. We're here to support you. And they breed this really healthy environment. So it's like, oh, it all makes sense now. Like, I'm in school, I have this job, and I have this great sense of community. Like, I love all my coworkers, and it's really healthy. So it's even when I'm doing the work, I don't have that kind of exhaustion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It can be a lot, but it's not the same mental drain that I felt when I was at the other jobs.
Because these different things are like feeding you. I love that. So I guess like before burnout, your purpose was defined by being, district manager, coffee, like my job is my life. How do you view your purpose now? How would you say, what is my purpose?
And yeah, that's changed so much because I actually don't define myself by anything like that now. Like, because even before I had my job, like, define myself as district manager, I defined myself as a student, like you were saying. Like, you're like, I've always been a student. I don't define myself by any of those matters. In fact, I define myself as, not to be corny, but like as someone who's like I'm a follower of Christ.
Yes.
My purpose in this world and just getting through it is to literally, I'm living my best life, but I'm also helping other people go through it. So I'm living by the way that God is laying out for me. I'm following his path, what he's driving for. And I've become so much happier because I'm living my life for him. And I'm living what the vision he wants for me. And I'm not living for, oh, I have to do this in 10 years because I want to run this shop. And, oh, I'm going to do this thing right now because this is what my parents want me to do. I know God's got my back. I know he's got my plan. So I'm doing right now what I pray and what he leads me to. He led me back to school. I'm getting my degree again. It's taken me a long time. I'm 23 and I don't have my bachelor's yet. And I started at 18, but I'm giving back because he gave me the opportunity to go back.
Man.
And it's what he provided me for. Because even with like the whole thing with the internship is I was really nervous because I was like, how am I going to do this workload? And I prayed on it. And I did not go on my way to get it. I'm going to be so honest. I talked to the professor once about it. And then he did the rest and brought it to me.
Wow.
So that's why I feel more comfortable doing it now, because I prayed about it. I thought about it. And then the rest came to me.
And the door opened. Yeah.
I was like, it's something I can do later. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. If God is putting me in this position now, he's putting me in this position now. And that's what happened.
Amen. I remember like struggling to kind of like, find my way again in a sense, like professionally, and kind of going a little all over the place, and not even all over the place, but just like being just led by him. Like he was like, oh, apply for this job, do this. And it didn't make sense probably to a lot of people, but it made sense to me because I'm like, well, that's what God told me to do. So that's just what I'm going to focus on. And then like later, why he had me where he had me made so much sense. And then it led me to what I'm currently doing. And I just even remember like I was applying for roles similarly, like at one point, and wasn't getting anywhere, or felt like I had to give up too much and wasn't getting enough for it. And I took a pause, really like Alyssa. I talked to like Alyssa one day because I was like just at my wit's end. And she was like, she's like, I just feel like God's saying, just stop for a little bit. And I was like, okay. So I took like maybe 3 weeks or so, just stop looking, stop applying places. And then one day I felt like the Lord was like, okay, look again. He's like, but aim higher. And I aimed higher, and I did get a call back. Like I only applied for 3 jobs that day and got offered basically all 3 jobs.
Period.
But it was like over a period of time. And like the job that I selected, it was the job that I really wanted because it had like, I had like made a prayer list before I applied to anything of like 5 different things that I wanted in the job. And this job had every single one of them, but I didn't find out, like, I got offered the one job, had to turn it down because of the deadline, because I was like, I just don't feel like that's it. I didn't have peace. And then the next job, I did a few trial days, and I really liked it. And the owner came in, sat down. He was like, the job's yours if you want it. But I still didn't have peace, and I felt bad because I was still like, hadn't had my 3rd interview yet with this job. And I waited, and I had the interview on my birthday. And it was so funny to me because my prayer was like, God, can I just get the job by my birthday? And then I had the final interview on my birthday, and then I was called by the manager, and I got the job. So praise him. But I literally was not qualified technically for the job. And and I still have like kind of struggled with that. But then I have to realize like, God gave me this. Like God wanted me to have it. And even if it doesn't last for a long time, or only if it's for a period, like it doesn't really matter. It's because I know this was his will, and I have peace knowing that it's his will. And it's not because it's my purpose. And it's more so because I know the things he wants to cultivate in me, and the things he wants me to do, which is spread his word and show his love to people. I can do really well in the setting that I'm in.
Yeah.
I love that I can show them love and Christ's love, even like wherever they're at. And it's so rewarding in a way. And I know, like, I think my heart breaks for people, especially like people in our age group, in our 20s, because there is such a temptation to find the meaning of your life behind like what you're doing professionally, and to find all of your value tied to that, even if you're a Christ follower, which is sad to me. I just want people to think about, like, if you're a musician and for some reason you broke your hands, or your vocal cords were stressed and you couldn't sing anymore, was that your purpose? Because if it's your purpose, then you feel like your life doesn't matter anymore. I don't know. It's like anything could happen to you where your physicality changes, or you lose your job, or something bad happens. And it's like, if you're putting all of your identity and weight in that one thing in your career, it's very dangerous. And I don't think people realize just how dangerous it is. And then there's also this temptation to kind of like compare your career, your journey, to like someone else's journey. Galatians 6:4-5 says, each one should test their own actions. Then they should take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. We all have our own loads that Christ gives us, our own assignments that he puts us on. And some of that may become a career, but that's not your whole purpose, and it's not your whole identity. It's only a small part of it. You are so much more than your job, or your business, or your role, any role. You are more than that. So number 1 is really stop making an idol out of your career. It is not who you are. It's only some of what you do.
Mm.
Serve. Yes, it's good to work. It's good to serve, but also remember to sit.
Mm.
So in the Bible, being busy is valued. We don't value slothfulness. We don't value laziness. Like, the Lord values work and work ethic. He does. But it's important to know when to work and when to stop. So Jesus modeled both hard work and rest. He knew when to step away from crowds and ministry. Like, I love that example of when he's outside of Capernaum and people are being brought to him basically from dawn to dusk of, like, exorcise this demon and heal this blind person. And he's just healing. He's performing miracles. And the very next day, he gets up at the crack of dawn and goes into solitude. He just leaves. Everybody's like, I'm out. Peace out. I did my thing that God wanted me to do today. Now I have to go sit with my Father and pray. And that's what he did. And I think that his rhythm of work and rest, of sitting and serving, that's what we need to model our work lives over. Like, I have an issue with the word work-life balance because I don't really think it's real. I love that balance that Jesus displays of, like, sit and serve. And it really makes me, like, because I have to check myself, and I feel like other people be checking me too. So some examples I have of me being checked is, one year I did, like, Seek and Save in Detroit, and I'm sitting there, and I think he's a pastor. He's, like, talking to him, like, during a break. And he looks at me at one point because I got there, like, early, and I was, like, so excited. It was my first, like, it was really my first missions trip. Like, it was my first, like, local missions thing that I did. And I was painting their lobby, and I was so happy, and I was meeting all these people, and I was like, this is awesome. And I remember he looks at me when I stopped for, like, a break, and I was just kind of like, oh, I should get back at it. And he's like, Miss Simone, I realize you signed up for this time block, but do you realize you don't have to work the entire time? Like, you're allowed to rest. Like, part of serving and being here is also that you sit and, like, talk to the people you serving with. And I was like, that's a good point. He's like, I think you should just go sit down somewhere and talk to some people. Maybe you'll learn something. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you just schooled me like this. But he was so right. And this happened too in Puerto Rico. So, like, and everybody had their little encounter with Pastor Hector. My encounter came where he came up to me, like, the second morning after we started on the work site. And he's like, Simone, I have a word. I need to tell you something. And I was like, what? He makes that intense eye contact. He got in my face. He held my shoulder. He looked me in the eye and he says, God says, be still. And I was like, oh man. I was like, really, Pastor Hector? He been telling me this for like a year. I thought I was doing it. He's like, not enough. And I was like, but I'm on a work trip. It's a construction project. He's like, yes. He's like, but be still. And I struggled with that so much. Of like, how do I marry stillness with still working and doing what I feel like God's telling me to do? Like, how do I do it? And I think it does come with that balance of sitting and serving and knowing, really just being in tune with your spirit and with your body of, like, hey, the Holy Spirit is empowering me to do X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to push myself to do A, B, and C as well. I'm going to work with the power of the Holy Spirit and trust that I will still get it done if I take my time to rest. Because we have to remember, I know it's very cliche. I think, like, Mike Todd did a whole sermon series about striving instead of striving. And, like, say what you want about Pastor Mike Todd, but, like, 2018, that was the sermon that did it for me. Like, it was the beginning of God telling me about stillness. And his whole message was really centered around the concept that Jesus fulfilled 400 years worth of prophecy in 3 years, but he walked everywhere he went. He didn't run. He didn't rush. He didn't, like, oh, when they hurried here, they did this there, or they, like, ran to this appointment. Like, they walked everywhere they went. And even the only animal that he's ever recorded to be riding is a donkey, which is a slow moving animal. He wasn't in a rush. He knew that God would allow him to do everything he came here to accomplish in the amount of time that he had.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we trust that? If that's the example that we're supposed to be following, we're supposed to be like Christ. Why are we so fixated on rushing
Mm-hmm.
and trying to do the most and trying to wear like this badge of busyness?
Mm-hmm. I don't think the Lord humbled me the most in Puerto Rico, and even you had to.
Oh yeah, I had a
Told me to
mama
be
moment. I
still.
was like, get back in that bed. I'm sorry. I was like, I'm sorry, Katie, but I'm about to yell at you. Sit down.
Literally, I got listeria poisoning when I was on our trip to Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And that was the
You scared the
sickest.
crap out of me. You scared me so bad. I was
I
like,
was gonna die.
I was like, God, don't let him die.
I was so y'all, it was so bad that my boyfriend proposed to me on the trip because he was like, it's gonna die and I have to take you to the hospital.
He did not propose because of that, Katie.
I need to do something. No, but literally, at this point, I was so toxic because even after I quit my job, I didn't let myself rest. And I was constantly doing something. It was constantly on the next. And I really grew in the spirit when I was in Puerto Rico. And I really was gathering my connection and growing with God. But he especially, like, because I got there, I never listened to my body. Like, I've had a lot of health issues in the past. And a lot of times I just didn't realize it, like, didn't recognize it. And I was just like, I'm fine. I can push through it. Like, it doesn't matter. And when I got to Puerto Rico and I started feeling sick, I was like, nah, I'm here to serve. I'm going to work. And he went, nah, bro, down. Like, this man.
You were down for the count. I'm so
was
sorry. I literally, and what drove me insane was I left you for a few hours and I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go to the work site, but I was like stressed out and I was like, you know what? I'm going back to the hotel. I have to check on Katie. And I get back to the room and you're getting your stuff on to like come back to the work site after we had been up all night with you, like, you know, getting sick all night. And I looked at you and I was like, what are you doing? And you're like, oh, well, this person came and checked on me and they said it's time to go back. And I was like, says who? I was like, excuse you? I was like, get in that bed. I felt like a mom, but I was like, there's no way you're leaving this room. I will like nail you down. It's like, you were sick. You're going to sit here. Like, I don't care where we are. They told us you could get this. Like, and you did. So you have to rest. Like,
no, literally, because at that point I was like, I'm here to work. I came all this way. Like, I'm gonna serve. I'm fine. I can power through it. And then, like, before you were leaving the room, you were like, nah, you're gonna stay here and rest. And then the other person came in and was like, can't really leave you here. We're gonna take you. I think you'll be fine. You'll feel better when you get to the workforce or work thing. Because wasn't it the day before I slept there for like hours?
Okay, how I remember it, and correct me if I'm wrong, was like we had dinner at that buffet, and then the next day you didn't feel that great, but you still worked. And then we were supposed to do like grocery delivery or something, but you like laid down instead. And then I was like telling them, I was like, I think she needs to go lay down. Like, I think she needs to go back to the hotel. They told me it's in the opposite direction. And then and then that night they like got you like some liquid IVs and like some detox charcoal pills. And we're like, oh, take this. And then that night,
the charcoal pills. Oh my god.
And then that night you were like, so like like the spirit woke me up. Like at 1 in the morning.
Remember I started screaming because I literally thought like that's when I came out of the room and was crawling on the floor because it felt like my appendix was bursting.
Oh my god!
Like I thought I was dying. Like I literally thought that was it.
I thought it was it. And then I called them at 3 in the morning. And then they were like, oh, like the hospitals aren't that great here. And I was like, I don't really give a crap where we're at. Like, we're still in the United States. Can you please take us to the hospital? Got told no. You know, I think it's just hard to admit when we're weary. Right? Especially when we're so used to being seen as strong. And That's the beauty of scripture. So in Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened or heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." And we know the souls are mind, will, and emotion. So all these things that we're putting on ourselves, it's like that we were really never meant to carry, that we really have to lean on him to carry. And even Isaiah 40:29-31, I love this script. Like, someone gave me a little picture with this scripture on it. My friend Teresa, thank you, Teresa, shout out. It says, "He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength." And I think that's what we have to remember to do, like, to keep that balance of like sitting and serving. We have to remember that like God's strength is shown perfectly in our weaknesses. When we come to the end of ourselves and we realize, when we reach this point of chronic exhaustion, of burnout, of coming to the end of our will and our power and our strength and our determination, our work ethic, we've reached that end, and we realize how much we really need God. And that the only way we truly find him, the only way we truly can get into his presence is by being still. And in that stillness, he restores us and he empowers us to serve others and excel at the plans that he puts on our hearts. Not the plans we come up in our minds, not like you said earlier, like the plans that, other people may put on us, but what his plan is, and like learn to be sensitive to his voice and his will, and how to follow that, which brings us to, I think, the third and final point, which is a labor of love. Because clearly work is not bad, but I think we all need to work towards having a healthy relationship with work.
Yes.
And like I said a moment ago, like, I don't really think a work-life balance is real. I think your work needs to rejuvenate you more than it depletes you. I think you need to enjoy your work, not the chronic in your mind, "Oh, I love my job. I love my job." It always makes me think of like Emily Blunt's character in like Devil Wears Prada.
I love that movie. I knew you were gonna say that. Yes.
Like, "I love my job. I love my job. I love my job." Like, and it's like, it's super toxic. It's crazy. It's like, "I love my job." You have to just remind yourself. It's like, no, you really don't. Like, I mean, and no job is perfect. There's always going to be battles, especially like when I talked about in the spiritual warfare episode, like, even though I know God gave me this job, there's been like constant warfare, and I'm like, what the heck? But I feel like his grace is sufficient. Like, I haven't felt like anything to the point of like, I'm gonna quit, I'm miserable, I'm crying every day. Like, that has not been the case. Even though it's been difficult, it has not been to the point where I'm like, oh, I hate this isn't what I'm supposed to. There's always so much reassurance, there's always so much provision, there's always so much good that it completely outweighs anything someone could throw at me, where I'm like, I have moments where I'm like, this crazy, these people crazy, everything crazy, but then I'm like, but God, you good. That's hilarious. It's like, I know it's what I'm supposed to do, and that's like truly loving what you do. But I think more than loving what you do, it's more so knowing that God puts you somewhere specific and he wants you to bloom where you're planted, and he keeps watering those seeds. And he'll continue doing it if you are obedient and if you stay committed to where he's called you. And most of your days will be filled with things you find joy in. I think like when you're in an environment that he's called you to, like, it can be the simplest thing. Like, I remember when I worked at the hotel, it was one of my favorite jobs. I would always say, like, it was one of my favorite jobs. I felt like my natural gifts were like utilized in that job. I'll always, like, when people tell me that they don't know what they want to do with their career or anything, I will sometimes just ask them like, well, what are your spiritual gifts? And I think if you kind of hone back into like what your spiritual gifts are, you may be able to find a job that just is just really aligned with you, like who God's created you to be. Like, I think everyone has many spiritual gifts, but like, I know like our church has a quiz that basically you take their becoming a member class, and like I took that quiz, and my top 3 were hospitality, exhortation, which is like encouragement, and administration. So I realized, I was like, what jobs can I do where I'm doing like admin work, where I'm able to encourage or uplift people and utilize my spirit of hospitality? And the hospitality industry, that's what I figured out. And I love it. Like, I don't, like, from the front desk agent to the community director, like, I love this industry. Like, I just do. I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. Like, I can just be my unapologetic self, and it's valued there. And that makes me feel really good. So it doesn't, you know, have to be like a fancy or important role, but a job that uses what you're naturally gifted in, I think does fill up your cup. It does like make you feel to the point where you can work, but not get to the point of chronic exhaustion, because you feel valued, and you feel valued for the right reasons.
No, exactly. Because even when I did that quiz, I got hospitality, administration, and then pastoral and like shepherding.
Ooh, and you work for pastors, and you do youth ministry.
Yes. No, that was my whole thing. Because when I got that originally, I remember even showing my bosses at the time, because this is when I worked at the coffee shop. They were like, that's interesting. And I was like, I don't think this is right. Literally, when I got this, I was like, I don't think this is right. Like, I'm not a, like, I'm a leader, but I'm a leader in a different way. Like, I'm a leader and like, I lead people at work. Like, I don't lead people in other things. And then I was like, I don't really do admin stuff. What? Literally now work as an admin. I'm a small group leader for high schoolers. And I'm like, and I feel so fulfilled. Like, I literally love it. And it's so crazy. I was like, wait a minute, what? And like looking back in the quiz, I'm like, oh, and also hospitality. You got to deal with people every day, especially working in the church.
Yeah. Yes, and like just I think having like a welcoming, warm spirit, and you know, making people feel seen and valued and heard, and that's so important in those roles. Customer service, it's something you can be taught, but dang, you gotta almost be born with it, like to be able to have the patience, that fruit. Like we need patience and some long suffering. But you know, careers can be consuming, but I would say working unto the Lord can make it feel rewarding, which I think is what we've gotten to. Like, I love to see that we've graduated from a state of like complete burnout to kind of a little bit of career identity ambiguity to now we have our identities firmly planted in Christ. And we're doing work and we're living our lives, and we know God is blessing us through these careers that he's given us, but we're not defined by them anymore. Exactly. Like I don't lead conversations with, oh, I do this. Even though I feel like I have a pretty nice job. Like I love my job. Like I'm proud of it for sure. But I'm not like, if I lost it tomorrow, I would still be me.
Exactly.
If I got fired, I'd still be me. God forbid. But I know he's got me. Like I know no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay.
I feel the exact same way. And I never had that type of security anywhere else, even though I was working 30 times as hard. Like I still work hard at my job now, but it wasn't the crazy dedication and the soul giving away that I was before.
Oof. After experiencing what you've experienced, are you more mindful of your own boundaries and parameters? Like, do you give yourself those check-ins? Like, even if externally people don't?
I do, because even today I like thought about, because I'm like, oh, I have this internship next semester. I'm like, I have enough where I can drop one of my classes if I wanted to and just had less classes, where before I would never allow myself to do that. Or I'd be like, you have to have this many and blah, 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 where I'm giving myself space where I'm like, if I need to do that, that's okay. And even just throughout this semester now, which I had all this crazy pressure on of performing, like this is my first time being back in a long time. I have to have good grades. Everyone's looking at me like I'm getting this position, leadership position in the club, and I just really have to pull through, and I'm spending all this money to going back to school. I have to do good. But even still giving myself space where I'm like, God's got me. It's not the end of the world. So right now I'm going to watch this movie with my husband and I'm going to take a break. Or like, oh, we're going to do this. I've studied for 3 hours. I mean, I never allowed myself to do that before. never give myself break, and I beat myself up really, really bad about it. Or even just taking a day and being like, you know what, we're not doing this today. We're going to focus on me. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to go to church today. I'm not going to do this assignment. I'll do it later. It's not a big deal. And really setting space aside for that, where I never allotted myself that type of grace. I was always really hard on myself.
I love that you say that, because I think, I mean, one of the things is like learning how to rest is like one of the points I really wanted to hone in on. And next episode, the season finale, will be about the Sabbath, basically your sacred rest. I think it's so powerful to work through the power of the Holy Spirit, not our own strength, and then honoring our need for rest, because like the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And I think it's really powerful to unpack that command of the Sabbath, because even though if we're New Testament believers, we don't like need to observe the Sabbath, like it's not a commandment for us in a sense, but it's still a very powerful principle. And I think when we incorporate a rhythm of rest into our lives and we model our lives after how Jesus worked and rested, we get to a place where we realize like God can do more with our 6 days if we give him that one day than we could do in like 7. Honestly, he could do more with like 4 or 5 days, as long as we just give him
a day,
our full attention for a day, and like honor ourselves and him and our need for rest. Like just kind of, I think, recognizing our humanity and being humble enough to be like, I need a break, and then not feel guilty about it, not beat ourselves up about it. And that takes a while to do. Like, I hope anyone listening realizes like this is something like we've like gone through over like years. Like, I mean, we had these really demanding jobs for 4 or 5 years, and then it was like a period of 2 to 4 years really for me at this point of like really learning how to have whatever people call work-life balance, but like to really like enjoy what I do and to still be in a season where I think I'm busy. Like I'm working full-time, I have a podcast, I'm still making time to see friends, family, I travel pretty frequently, I'm trying to do things like that, but I don't feel even close to the same level of tired that I felt just working like that one remote job. I felt completely drained. And I don't feel drained like that anymore. I rest well at night. I enjoy my days off. I enjoy my time with people. I enjoy all the different aspects of rest and what that looks like. And we're going to go into the different forms of rest next episode. But I think it is just so powerful to look at these examples and to realize, like, you know, Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. I think with this culture of burnout, with this culture of like identity based on like what you do, it's really about like trying to please man. Like we were talking about people pleasing earlier. Your goal and your focus should be to please God more than it should be to please man. And I think when your mindset around work shifts to that extent where you're committing to the Lord, whatever you do, especially your work, and knowing that he will establish your plans, as Proverbs 16:3. In Ecclesiastes 3:22, like, I have seen that there is nothing better for a man to enjoy his work because that is his lot. And Ecclesiastes is kind of deep. Like I have an article that y'all can read through because it really has this like concept of like everything's meaningless. Like you can work and you can toil and it doesn't amount to anything, and it's all vanity. And it's very much like the preacher, or how a lot of scholars will say it's Solomon, talking about like I've achieved all this wisdom, but like it's really not worth anything. And I think the only thing at one point that in Ecclesiastes he says like gives you meaning is the fact that like the Lord is pleased with your work because you're doing it unto him. Or enjoying it and you're finding satisfaction in it. And because you know that you're pleasing him more than you look at what you've done or the wealth you've amassed. It's less about the money or the productivity. It's more about, is God pleased? Is he honored by what I'm doing? Is he in control of what I'm doing? Have I committed my work to his will and his plans for me? And then that brings you joy and satisfaction. So it doesn't feel meaningless, because our time on here is but a vapor. Like we're here one day, we're gone the next. Are you going to spend it being burnt out? Are you going to spend it getting your satisfaction and value from how other people perceive you?
Yeah.
For everyone listening, I just want you to know that, like, we know it's good to work, and that God will bless the fruits of your labor. He'll bless it, and he'll use wherever you're planted to make you better, to grow those fruit, to cultivate fruit within you, those fruits of the Spirit that you need to become more like Christ. He'll use you if you allow him to, wherever he's planted you. But you have to remember that work is important, but also rest is important. And burnout is just not worth it. It's not, like, honestly, like, for most companies, you're completely replaceable. I hate to say it like that, but you're completely replaceable. And if it's not honoring God, if it's not honoring your body and your soul and your spirit, it's not worth it.
Because what you're doing is you're burning yourself out for things of this earth, not what's next.
Or we should be focusing on storing up our treasures in heaven. Like, we should be focused on the eternal more than we're focused on this temporal, materialistic, like the vanity of it all. Like, we shouldn't be as focused on that. And it's really hard to say that, especially in a society that values it so much. But I think once you kind of make that mindset shift and embrace God's strength and his rest and his peace, you will flourish and be way more successful and do way more with the time you have than you could have ever imagined. So, Katie, would you mind closing us out in prayer?
I got you. Okay. Well, dear Heavenly Father, I'd just like to thank you so much for this time that we had together to talk and really unpack burnout. And I really hope that Simone and I's testimony today can help others that are experiencing this or have gone through this and help lead them on the path just to live for you and follow in your ways. And just pray for rest for everyone. Pray for rest for us. As we're going into this new year, we're starting with a new, fresh start, and we're going to go in with clear mindset. And we're going to go in with thinking of how to honor you and enjoying our Sabbath. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I quick testimony. I'm going to say, in recording and trying to get these episodes done, like last night, I was supposed to record an episode with someone. I went to their place, we were doing it, or we were about to, and my computer wouldn't work. And I was like, what is going on? And she's like, well, maybe it's just not God's will tonight. Maybe his will is for us to just actually embody the message with within what we were talking about, which was like friendship. And I was like, okay, so we just kind of visited with each other and caught up. And then the next day I went to work, and then the power was out. And then the power came back, but then the Wi-Fi was out, so I couldn't do any work. And then I just worked on creative stuff, like the podcast stuff that I was doing. And I felt like, oh wow, this is crazy. But then I realized, because I hadn't really had a Sabbath, because the week prior I had worked 7 days or 6 days straight. And I on the Sunday, I did, it was restful, but I still was doing things. But from that 5 o'clock 24-hour period, I really did no work. I just was in my Bible. I was prepping for an episode. I was reading articles. I was reading scripture. I was just resting. And I was there at work, but I did no work basically for the whole 8 hours. And I just was kind of chilling with God and chatting with my coworkers. And it was just such a beautiful day. And I'm like, and then I left and I was like, oh, so you just gave me a whole impromptu Sabbath. I didn't take one, but you're giving it.
I got it.
So, but I got it, and I really felt refreshed. I've never felt so energized at 6 o'clock at night. I was like, this is so beautiful. And yeah, so I wanted to share that, because I just feel like there's just a testament that, if you seek God enough, even if you can't mentally comprehend, how can I avoid burnout and get the rest that I need when things are going by quickly, ask God. He will make a way. like it felt like a miracle essentially, because I got done like some kind of important things, but they were also like fun things for me to do that I really enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
But I was almost like stressed about them before, because I'm like, well, how am I going to get this done? Like, I don't really have the time. And he made me time. So thank you for listening. Our mission as believers is to spread the gospel. And if this episode has touched you in any way, please share it to evangelize or encourage, and subscribe to join the conversation. So thank you for listening, and God bless.